and esteemed participants. My name is Vuyo Tedyana. I am the Manager for Monitoring and Evaluation at the Jobs Fund. Welcome to the Jobs Fund's first webinar for 2023. Compliments of the new year to you all. We look forward to a vibrant webinar program this year, where we bring you interesting and topical conversations on what we are learning as the Jobs Fund continues to support the job creation initiatives across various sectors of the economy. Today's webinar is brought to you in proud partnership with the National Treasury's Government Technical Advisory Center. This is part of GTAC's weekly webinar series. We want to give a special word of thanks to Anita from GTAC for her continued support and invaluable guidance to the Jobs Fund on these sessions. Ladies and gentlemen, the Jobs Fund was capitalized in 2011 with 9 billion rand to uncover and pilot innovative job creation models on a co-funded basis. Its mandate is twofold: to test innovative job creation models and to share lessons and good practice, thus promoting wider market adoption of scalable and replicable models. The fund was established in a context of high levels of unemployment in the country. However, the fund was never meant to be a mass employment creation program, but rather government's research and development capability with respect to job creation interventions. The Jobs Fund deploys the Challenge Fund instrument to test job creation models and identifies, through experimentation, solutions that can eventually be replicated and scaled. Globally, Challenge funds have emerged as an effective and versatile financing mechanism with which to channel public money to catalyze pro-poor innovation and investment in emerging markets, as well as to provide profitable ways of improving market access for the poor. The ultimate development goal of a Challenge Fund is, through a finite intervention, stimulate a long-term change in the way that local supply chains and market systems work, so as to overcome barriers such as cost and technology, which may have excluded poor producers and households in the past. Through the Challenge Fund instrument, the Jobs Fund is therefore able to draw on the most competitive ideas and the latest innovation. We are able to partner with capable and experienced intermediaries, bringing their expertise and networks to bear on solving some of our most intractable challenges. We are also able to leverage public funds to crowd in significant private sector and other resources in order to maximize investment in social impact. In her SONA debate address in February of 2022, Minister of Agriculture, Togo Didiza, reiterated the significant role that agriculture plays in a post-COVID recovery economy. She reminded the House that there are a number of reasons why it is important to get our agriculture sector going in South Africa. Some of these reasons include the fact that growth in agriculture is 2 to 3 times more effective in reducing poverty amongst the poor. That agriculture is a resilient sector with much potential for increased GDP contribution. Notwithstanding the ravages of the COVID pandemic, the sector's exports reached a record $11.5 billion in 2021. So in our session today, my colleagues will speak to you about a number of good practices that the Jobs Fund and our partners in agriculture have found to be critical in both the delivery of support to, as well as the success of, smallholder farmer development initiatives. As indicated earlier, One of the key mandates of the Jobs Fund is in the sharing of lessons of good practice with the wider development community. The Jobs Fund is able to do this because it incorporates in the design of its operations a rigorous monitoring and evaluation framework that allows it to track and demonstrate progress against headline objectives. Without such systems, none of our programs in government can usefully determine their effectiveness. These systems enable interventions such as the Jobs Fund to generate credible and reliable data on their work. These data therefore promote improved intervention outcomes, knowledge sharing across different public and private programs, thus making for evidence-based policy making. Ladies and gentlemen, we hope that you will find today's webinar informative and useful in your areas of work. We request that you post both your questions and insights on the chat. Our Jobs Fund team will be on hand to respond to your questions. The webinar recording and the slides will also be made available on the GTEC website. I'll now invite my colleague, Mr. Hilton Sarukunda, who is also the facilitator of today's session, to introduce the presenting team. Over to you, Hilton.
Thank you, Voyo, and good afternoon to everybody. Good afternoon to colleagues. Good afternoon to specialists and some of the partners that are joining us this afternoon. The good practice framework for agriculture is something that is very close to our heart, and it came as a result of a lot of research and findings as we were implementing agricultural projects. I am a team leader within the Jobs Fund Project Management Unit, and my name is Hilton Sarukunda. Today, we'll be presenting together with Danny Swart, who is our agricultural specialist, Sonko Piri, who is also a project manager within the PMU, and Lionel Kunene, who is a senior project manager within PMU of the Jobs Fund. I think one of the things that we're not going to do is show ourselves, I mean, given the challenges of the load shedding, we will show ourselves at introductions and switch off the camera so that we have a more smoother delivery of the presentation. Thank you, colleagues. Can we move to the next slide, Director? So agriculture plays a huge role in the economic development of the country, right? Not only does it bring food to our tables and plays a significant role to our survival, but it is a key unlocking pillar of the economy. If you think of agriculture, you realize that it is in every part of our daily living. One thing I love about agriculture is that it creates jobs across the skills divide, right? While someone is working and tilling the land, someone is creating the chemicals that will make sure that the plants that are being planted will survive and feed the nation. It creates jobs across the skills divide, right? It creates jobs across the geographical divide. It creates jobs across the digital divide. I mean, even when we have load shedding, someone is working somewhere in agriculture. So we asked ourselves, when we work in agriculture, how do we leave behind a legacy of sustainable, competitive, and commercially viable agricultural entities? And we answered that through our engagement and research that we should be offering systemic solutions to constraints that are faced by smallholder farmers in South Africa. We should look at lowering barriers to entry. How do we get more farmers and young farmers into the space? How do we create large-scale impact? How do we produce sustainable models? And ultimately provide support to smallholder farmers to improve their commercial viability and integrate them into the existing value chains in agriculture. Next slide, please. We have 45 agricultural projects that we have contracted by September 2022. And in our 10th call, we have a few others that we have also approved. Can you go to the next slide, please, Lerato? Most of the time when somebody says agriculture, we picture people tilling the land and working on a farm. But agriculture is much more broader than that. There's a number of models that we have approved and we have funded or co-funded with our partners. Some of the models include shareholding schemes at primary production. This looks at improvement of ownership of agricultural products and land by smallholder farmers. We have a project called Stagro, Susanna project, which looks at partnership between commercial entities and emerging funds and giving them shareholding in the business. But it's not just giving shareholding in the business, it's giving meaningful shareholding in the business where the farmers participate actively and meaningfully in the business. We have what we call value chain development, where we are assisting smallholder farmers in overcoming constraints such as poor access to market and weak bargaining powers. So we have projects such as Watfin, which looks at developing farmers in the deciduous fruit industry. It's not just about just developing them, but linking them with the export market and making sure that the product that is coming from there speaks to the quality that is expected by the market that we're targeting. We have on-lending projects, which looks at giving farmers financial assistance and blending that with the skills that they require to be a viable business. And an example of that is the Capital Harvest Emerging Farmer Projects, which gives niche financing products to smallholder farmers that include 15-year loan repayments. These services are augmented with skills that are required by these and mentorship that are required by these farmers. And then we've got outgrow models, which typically, where we partner with people that will then, ensure that there is a clear offtake for the smallholder farmers. And we have an example of the Ilovo Small Scale Grower Project in the KZN project, as well as the other sugar market players in that space. We've got agro-processing, where beneficiaries are given access to the agro-processing value chains, right? We've got Milk SA, which looks at a farmer support program that targets emerging farmers to participate in the milk industry. So, building little milk processing plants for them that then, becomes part of the value chain in milk production. We've got infrastructure investment projects where we have looked at the building of things like pack houses. We have a project called Timbali, which is in the Nwanedi area of the Limpopo province, which we built a pack house that services all farmers in that area. Those farmers, we started with 150 farmers. By the end of the project, we had about 350 farmers that were benefiting from the pack house. So they'll bring all their product to the pack house, and the projects will be quality checked, and they would get their income based on the quality of the product that they bring to the pack house. But it was not only about the pack house, but it was about capacitating these people from a technical perspective and business perspective to ensure that their businesses are run sustainably. We've got some incubator programs. We've got a project called WIPSI Urban Agriculture Initiatives, which creates urban agricultural entrepreneurs. It's a very exciting project where we have some rooftop farmers that are doing production on top of the roofs and supplying vegetables in the market linked to critical off-takers. And we've got some technical skills development projects. We've got Lima Smallholder Farmer Project, which is playing in that particular space. Next slide, please, Lerato. So far, Jobs Fund agricultural projects operate in all 9 provinces. As I said earlier on, the beauty about agriculture is you touch everyone in any corner of the country. Most of these projects are in the rural areas where there's a real need for them, right? We're financed by 1.8 billion grant. As we said, we are a competitive fund, but we're also a risk-sharing fund. So whoever accesses the grant fund must bring something of their own in terms of funding the project. And out of the own funding from the partners, we have managed to leverage 3.2 billion rand out of the 1.8 billion grant that we've given out there. The farmers and beneficiaries that are supported, we've got over 17,000 smallholder farmers and agricultural SMEs that we have supported. We have trained over 47,000 people. And the job creation has been really impactful. We have created over 82,600 jobs that we have facilitated. 47 of those are permanent jobs and placements. Over 15,000 are seasonal jobs. 20,000 are short-term jobs, and 200 beneficiaries have completed internships in this sector. Through the support of this project, the JF has amassed a significant body of knowledge, which has resulted in this webinar that we are doing, but we have also produced a paper which is available for all to indulge in their reading. At any point you can request it and we will share it with you. And the webinar will share some of those findings that resulted in that paper. Next slide, please. So we then asked ourselves, what are the critical elements that we are finding, right, in terms of the intervention in this particular space? What do we need to do to make sure that we build, businesses that will last beyond just the Jobs Fund with the little money that we have? And we identify these critical elements. Colleagues, as we were indicated earlier on, if you think of any other interventions that we may have missed or elements that we may have missed, please feel free to share that with us and then we can engage. It's an interactive session. The elements that we identified include good governance, institutional arrangements and management. What we would notice is that with agricultural projects and any other project, and if we don't have good governance and institutional arrangements in place, you are in for a project that will just collapse. So, Danny will go through that particular segment in detail. We also looked at effective human resources and skills development, which Lana will talk to. Consultative social facilitation. Most of these projects are in communities and there are huge challenges in communities. I mean, these challenges include the barriers in terms of language, barriers in terms of common understanding of what business should be, barriers in terms of just, overall understanding between people. So without critical social facilitation, those businesses may be faced with a huge challenge. We looked at access to land and appropriate water resources, access to production inputs and extension services, access to markets, and fit for purpose financial support. And when we say fit for purpose are you given the right financial support at the right level that you should be intervening at? And that we'll also look at in our presentation. Access to meaningful information. Most of these smallholder farmers that we impact are in rural areas where, the access to information becomes a real challenge from so many different angles. So what is it that we can do to give people meaningful information, and not just meaningful information, but information that they can relate to, that they can understand? Is this information, can it be disseminated in a language that is common in that particular area? We looked at sustainable empowerment. So the projects that we have supported have tried by all means to look at the empowerment element that we're having in there is sustainable. And, when we talk sustainable, it means whoever is working with these smallholder farmers should be at some point able to, when they walk away, these smallholder farmers, they have grown into commercial viable businesses. and effective measurement arrangements. How do you measure the success of this? What you realize, and as presenters go through it, is that each critical element here has who should do what, and how do we measure that success. So critical success factor in each of these elements. I think from here, I will hand over to Danny to take us through our first element. Danny, over to you.
Thank you, Hilton. Good afternoon, all. It's good to see all your familiar names, and it's good to be here. It's Friday as well, so just a reminder. Okay, so the first good practice is good governance, institutional arrangements, and management. This refers to a collection of business management processes that are required for the planning and implementation of a project to make sure that we reach the goals of the project and that everybody benefits. These arrangements should be created at the beginning of a project. Otherwise, as Hilton said, this can often be the cause of projects failing. Lerato, we can go to the next slide, please. Okay. So here I'm going to outline the 4 key success factors for this good practice and talk a bit about it. And you will also see that there's evidence and responsibility columns, but I'm not going to dwell on that much for the interest of time. Okay. So as a start, as an assumption, we assume that the project initiator has identified a specific project model, a challenge, an activity and outcomes. And for farmer support programs, usually the challenge is barriers to entry. The activity is the full range of farmer support program services. And the outcome is about farmers evolving into commercial entities. What's also important from the outset is that we've got a good understanding of the scope of a project, and to have to confirm what is part of the project and what is not part of the project in various ways, geographically, etc. What I also find useful for developing this framework is to do a constituency analysis. Now, that is just a fancy name for identifying entities with an interest in the success and the outcome of this project. And also everybody will be impacted by this project, both positive and negative. An important element of this framework is an emphasis on beneficiaries and to make sure that they are involved as far as possible. Okay, let me talk to each of the key success factors briefly. The first one is to design a project governance framework before the start of the project, but supported by all shareholders. So this is about who should do what and what are their responsibilities. The second key success factor is to establish an inclusive structure at the project strategic level to provide strategic direction for the project and to ensure stakeholder involvement. And one of the first activities of such a structure would be to make sure that it's inclusive and to revisit the project model, so to ensure that everybody is in line with what we're trying to achieve. And then there are various activities also required to select a chairperson and processes and terms of reference for this committee. It could be a steering committee, it could be a board of directors. It depends on the situation for the project. And then from there, we design and confirm organizational structures, including ownership of the various organizations that are part of this project. it's about the mandate of the different organizations, the organizational structure, the people required, the financial plans, and so on. And these organizations may be funds or private sector entities or even DFIs or things like that. The last one is to design and establish committees, systems, and procedures for each of the created entities. So this is about committees for decision-making, systems for taking documentation through the cycles and proceedings, and also including selection criteria for identifying farmers. Now, this may seem logical and easy to do, but one shouldn't underestimate the time and the effort required to do this. It is really an essential part of a project to ensure that you've got a solid platform to move from. Thank you. So that is the good practice one: good governance, institutional arrangement, and management. Hilton, I think I'm still on for the next good practice: effective human resources and skills development. So this is about capacity of our system to deliver. And we often say that people are our most important resource. This is also the case for a farmer support program. On the project level, we need human resources to implement the project. For the overall project, for service provision to smallholder farmers. And here I want to highlight especially mentorship and training. Mentorship is essential. We, for instance, at many of our projects, identified, for example, in Tahoon irrigation scheme, the important role of mentors, that often the project hinges on the success and the relationship between the mentors and the farmers, and the trust relationship between them. And then also loan management, if it's an on-lending project, that you have the appropriate people to deal with loan management and the repayment of funding. On the farmer level, if you read through the comments here, it may seem that we are saying that farmers are incapable, but to the contrast, these people really have the capacity to survive and they can show their skills. But we also know that farmers have been excluded and marginalized over the years, and that this is a special area of support, namely skills development. In beneficiary selection, it's important to select the right farmers to participate. Farmers should be motivated. Now, we are saying that farmers should have a decent track record. Now, that is debatable because many of these people do not have a track record. So when we develop selection criteria, that is not the only criteria that we're looking at. It's more about somebody's willingness and intention to farm and to become a farmer. So we can now move to the key success factors. The next slide, please. So the first key success factor here is targeted recruitment of farmers. So we've already talked a bit about selection criteria, and one should really focus on developing the selection criteria and to select the right type of farmer. Then farmers and new employees should be onboarded on the project. Then formulation of realistic business plan should be done for each of the farmers as well as each of the entities involved in the farmer support program. Now, the formulation of these business plans should involve the farmer on an active basis and should not be done on their behalf, and that should be facilitated. In certain cases, we have created a special, call it a fund or mechanism, to support farmers with funding and technical support to do business planning. And that was successful. And then, of course, it's about the implementation of these business plans and to learn through the process of implementation and upgrade the business plans as you go. And then performance management, monitoring and evaluation of the implementation. And then skills development. We've talked a bit about skills development already. And often what we start with a skills assessment to really identify focus areas for each farmer. And training and mentorship, as I said, is a critical part of this key success factor. Thank you, Hilton. That is from my side. Good practice 2, effective human resource and skills development. Back to you, Hilton.
Thank you, Danny. Lano will take us. Oh, sorry, I was muted. Lana will take us through good practice 3, but I was checking the chats. I don't see questions that have been raised on this particular practice that Danny has just presented. I see comments from the DDG around addressing barriers. Maybe I can read one of them. One of the key barriers that is always raised in terms of agriculture is access to land. And the Jobs Fund has identified innovative approaches to obtain access to land, leasing arrangements, such as the challenge that is also for us to change our paradigm and explore how farmers access land while the more challenging issues of ownership are being resolved. Our approach is let's find solutions to address the challenges of here and now. I couldn't agree more. Alana, you can take us through the next segment for practice. Alana, you're on mute.
Thank you. Very good afternoon to everybody. Thanks to Danny for reminding us that it's Friday afternoon. I was wondering why am I in a good mood. On the good practice number 3, it is about consultative social facilitation. The keyword there being consultative, because some of the social facilitations that are done outside, it's just a tick box exercise, just to prove that that has been done. It is one of the key elements that is critical to ensure the success of the project, not only during the implementation phase when the Jobs Fund is still involved, but going on with the project even after our participation. It's critical in developing an overall community consultation forum. When you do the social facilitation, one has to identify the key stakeholders that can make or break the project. And those are the people that have to be kept abreast and have to be made part of the project. The important elements that we look at when implementing the social facilitation would be to get the support from the community leadership. Now, one needs to understand that specific community dynamics. Sometimes the leadership might not be the official people who are on paper, but you might have people who are very influential in the community. Or in other cases, in certain areas, you might find that there is leadership where there's leadership overlapping, where you have councillors and the chiefs. Then one has to work around those dynamics. What is critical here as well is to build the trust. This is very critical because when challenges, when you come across challenges in the implementation of the project, which you will surely do, you want your trust balance to be in the positive with the community and and all the other stakeholders. You should also have realistic expectations, or give or communicate realistic create realistic expectations. You do not want to promise paradise when the delivery time comes. You then are stuck with the lemon. The community buy-in is very critical. We've seen some of the projects or in agriculture where the community sometimes gets fed up and they just stall the project. So they need to get their buy-in. One of the ways in getting that buy-in is doing what we call benefit sharing, where there will be something in it for all the stakeholders, be it others getting the jobs from the project, be it the community getting other services. It could be the improvement of roads, building of community halls, or there are many things that one could use to under benefit sharing. Then the other one is conflict management. In these situations, there will always be conflicts because all communities have their own community politics, and sometimes these community politics find their way into the project. So one needs or people with skills to manage that conflict. Succession planning, what we've realized, and also Delray, Department of Agriculture has they've voiced their concerns under this one. In South Africa, the average age of a farmer is on the wrong side of 65. Now we all know what that means. It means then that in about 20 or 15 years, there will be a huge shortage of farmers. So we need to invest or ensure when we do that social facilitation that there is a succession in place. In most cases, what we do or what we try and avoid is only to have a good relationship with our Jobs Fund partners, forgetting or leaving out the other stakeholders. So when we participate in these projects, we always want to have that good relationship with all the stakeholders. Now, the key success factors then in summary will be then the appointment of a social facilitator at the design phase of the initiative. You don't want to invite people to be part of the project when the project is already in its implementation phase. Understanding the contextual framework under which the project is being implemented, that we spoke of things like politics, community politics, etc. Understand how the beneficiaries and wider community engages with the project. When we speak of beneficiaries, so that we are on the same page, we will have a Jobs Fund partner that we contract with, but they act as intermediaries, where then they assist the smallholder farmers in this case, or the SMEs in other sectors. So we want to know how will the beneficiaries then benefit from the project, and also the wider community. The development of the clear conflict grievance resolution process, which we've touched on earlier on. We then also identify an appropriate structure which will be used then in the implementation of the project. Next slide. I'm not going to spend more time on this. It covers the previous points that I touched on. Like Daniel had said, that it shows now who's responsible for each of the activities. You also look at what are the outputs that are required for each of the activity to be successful, and the evidence which can be presented, which is what we look at. So I will then move to the good practice number 4. This one is access.
Daniel, just before you do, I think there's a comment,
yes,
from Rian, right, where he says, in his personal opinion, most farmers can farm and have the technical know-how. The gap is getting them to grow their business skills and the need for business development coaching. Their business structure is not necessarily at a level to suddenly deal or cope with huge loans or grants. They are most of the time too shy to admit that they don't always understand the business side of agriculture.
I can't. Thanks for that. I can't agree more with that point. You will find later on there is another good practice which also touches on the other element where the beneficiaries get trained. But it's so critical. Yes, the technical skills, those I don't want to undermine or but the technical skills, it's something that one can also maybe even learn from YouTube at times. I mean, something that one can go to university, get those technical skills. One can, but to give the holistic business skills or management skills in farming, that is, yes, that's one of the things that that lacks, that we face as challenge. Farmers forget that they are business people as well. They are businessmen. That at the end of the day, they have to make the profits. If I say farmers, I mean, in this case, we speak mainly on smallholder farmers. Sometimes they get that excitement and the kick just from getting the technical skills and forgetting the other building elements.
Proceed, Lionel.
Yeah, thanks. And thanks for that comment. The good practice number 4. We live in South Africa. We all know, not only in South Africa, but even in Africa, we've seen also under other African states having this challenge, which is access to land. This is it has a huge impact in farming. We are looking at not only land, but also water. Now, we know that the type of the land will determine the type of the commodity that the farmer will look at. Sometimes a farmer might have passion for rice farming or growing, and yet there's no water in that region, but they force the matters. The land is often then classified in 4 broad categories. We will look at either the land is arable or non-arable. If it's non-arable, then you will need the the farming that is appropriate for that. You could look at maybe game farming if it's non-arable, or other, there are other crops that do not require that much water. Whether it can be, the other area could be used for grazing, where you will have the livestock. The land which I'm sure all of us are familiar also with is the one which we use for construction, building our houses, etc. The other land can be used for other infrastructure like roads, canals, etc. Now, I have touched on the fact that it's not only the ownership of land that is critical, it's also the water or access to water that is also critical, because one can have land right next to the dam and not having the rights to take the water from the dam. Then you are just as bad as being 100 miles from there. The land can be owned by private, it can be owned by state, it can also be communal ownership, which then if you are doing a project there, you will need to know how to maneuver and the requirements for working under those different land types. Now, we know that the ownership of land, especially when it comes to smallholder farmers, it doesn't exist. There are very few who would have it. So we also then look at things like the rights to use that land, which you also find in communal lands, etc. Now, that can also, this will also apply in water usage, where a project or that beneficiary is probably allocated so many cubic meters of water per month or per year. So the project should be able to survive within that allocation or that quota. Now, the key success factors under the land access are the security tenure, the appropriate selection of farming enterprise according to land potential, we've touched on that one. The application of sound environmental practices. You do not want when the project has been implemented and it's running, and then the Department of Agriculture come and then they charge the project for not following the environmental practices or getting the environmental approvals that are required. I am not going to dwell much on this slide. It covers what we had touched on in the previous slide. Just looking, as I've said before, the evidence and the actual things that we measure, and also who's responsible for each one of that. Can I move to good practice number 5? This one is good practice number 5 is access to inputs and extension services. Now, inputs, these are the things that you, it's almost like your bill of materials for you to be able to produce the maize on the fields. What are the things that you need to mix or have in place? It could be things like your fertilizers, the preparation of the ground, could be other chemicals, could be the harvesters, etc. So when one looks at their inputs, we look at the following categories, where you have the infrastructure. These are the sheds, the pack houses, the crawls, all those structures that are, or those fixed assets that are there. Sometimes when you speak of infrastructure in agriculture, people think of the infrastructures like highways and the airports, etc. Those are huge ones. But here we're speaking of those fixed assets. You also have the capital items. These are your tractors, your trailers, your harvesters, etc. The overhead costs, it's common across all the sectors, as would be your salaries and wages, your maintenance, your insurances, etc. The variable inputs, these are your inputs that rely on the use of land or the amount of land or the size of land that you're using. So if I'm planting, say, 100 hectares of maize, I'm not going to need the same amount of fertilizer than if I'm planting 10 hectares. So these are where these come in, especially they assist then when you do the budgets, especially for in the design phase of the project. The key success factors on the inputs and extension services would be wanting to achieve the economies of scale, which when you look at smallholder farmers, the weight itself, it shows they are small. Usually they will have a small plot of land. Now, how do you achieve economies of scale? Those are the challenges that you look at. There could be things like aggregating the land or where you have different plots, but using common inputs. Effective and efficient farm activities, regular maintenance of fixed and movable assets, purchasing the production inputs at competitive prices. I spoke earlier on about aggregating, where if now you are buying or the inputs, if you buy in bulk, you obviously can reduce the prices, so you reduce your expenses. But also now, because you've aggregated, now you are having a lot of more product or more produce under in your shed. Now it gives you that strength when you go to negotiate prices with your buyers or the market. The quality of inputs should be sufficient for its intended use. Here we should use the right inputs for the right, having in our mind the market. If I'm farming maize, which will be used in the animal feed, I shouldn't use the seeds which are of higher quality, which could be used for the high quality maize meal. So otherwise, my cost versus income will there will be a mismatch there. The production inputs should be available at the right time and the right place. Timing is very critical in agriculture. If you miss that planting season, for every period of days that you miss, it affects your yields. So as an example, if you were supposed to plant maize on the 15th of November, you plant it at the end of November, you will find that your yields, you were gonna get 14 tons per hectare yields. Just that those 15 days could cost you, and you end up with 8 tons per hectare. So now you've lost almost 50% of your yields. You deciding on whether the provision of goods or services should be outsourced to contractors or it should be used internally. This is critical because most of the activities in farming can be or are seasonal. So you look at things even like harvesting. You don't harvest throughout the year. You don't plant throughout the year unless you have variety of crops that you are planting. So one would look at, does it make sense to have the full-time employees or resources, or I just use as I need them. Extension services are available to smallholder farmers to guide them on effective use of production inputs. These are things that we always also insist on when we participate in this agricultural project. We can move to the next slide, which I will Once again, I'm not going to dwell much on this because I have covered these ones as we were speaking on the previous one. I move to good practice number 6. Number 6 is access to market. In so many cases, when the applicants or the potential partners come to us and they present this lovely project which will address the technical side, the farmers will be trained on how to plant this crop. They will be given the access to funding. So we will give them the maybe grants and loans. They will, so everything is in place, and yet they forget one element, which is access to market. So at the end of the day, basically, a farmer might sit with 1,000 tons of maize in a silo, but no one who's prepared to buy that. So we insist on access to markets, whether it is at the primary level of agriculture or at the secondary level. So basically, by access to markets, we are saying that once the product has been produced, there must be someone who's willing to buy, or not willing only, but who will buy that product. Now, the factor that's so critical when you speak of the access to market is also not only to produce the right quality, but also the right quality consistently. You do not want you do not want a consumer to, when they go and they buy a cereal box at Woolworths, and the quality varies depending on who's the farmer that produced that. So that is another challenge with, especially with the smallholder farmers. When we look at the key success factors under the access to markets, that they include the identification and understanding of various markets by the beneficiary. Sometimes the beneficiaries are just told, okay, grow these tomatoes, and they do not know who is the end user. What is it that they intend to use it for? It's probably, those tomatoes are probably going to be used for making a tomato paste, for making a tomato sauce, or they will be used for fresh produce. So you need to be open with the beneficiary so they understand the whole value chain. If you do that, you find that at times there will be that pride that I am growing tomatoes for Woolworths. Knowing the quality of Woolworths, they buy into all the requirements that are required, be it by a good agricultural program, which is GAP. Now, also training for producing for each market must be ongoing process. Underline the word each market. It's so critical. Sometimes smallholder farmers, it looks and it sounds good when you tell your friends I'm growing tomatoes for Woolworths, but there are different markets that could and there is that gap as well to sell to the informal market, where the barriers are not as high as dealing with the retailers. With the retailers, it will not only be maybe just the tomato, the taste, but also the shape of the tomato, the color of the tomato. But when you deal with the informal sector, those barriers are avoidable. The offtake agreements must be in place. And these offtake agreements, they depend on, according to the market that one is dealing with. If you're dealing with your retailers, they probably won't give you the offtake agreement. but what they might give you is that you will be listed as one of the suppliers, so that if they're happy with your quality, they will often ask you to bring your produce. And if they are not happy with your quality or your price, then you will remain there on the list, but they will not be buying. So it depends who your market is. Now, on the aggregation of production, I've touched on it with this way you want to control either your costs or your influence in negotiating the prices. If you go to Woolworths and you say, I've got 2 hectares where I'm planting tomatoes, they might send you to a security guard, and that you go and negotiate with a security guard. But if you go there and you say, I've got 10,000 tons of tomatoes that I can supply every year, then their senior buyers can sit down and talk to you. The essence of credible marketing plan is vital. I think that is common in across all sectors as well. If I can move to good practice number 7, please, Lerato, thanks. Now, the other thing that we've identified as being a good practice in these projects is
Lionel? Sorry,
yes,
man. There's just a question on good practice 6, which we just completed.
Yeah.
The question from Mamiki is, besides the non-socio-economic factors in South Africa, what are the chances in a successful barter transaction of agricultural commodities between farmers who operate in different provinces in South Africa and within the African states?
Sorry, just come again. The sound, I lost a bit. Just
Besides the non-socio-economic factors in South Africa, what are the chances in a successful barter transaction of agricultural commodities between farmers who operate in different provinces in South Africa and probably within the African states?
It does happen. It does take place. It's amazing. If you go to the Johannesburg fresh produce, you will find most, let me not say most, but other produce that are coming as far as Limpopo. If we use the projects that we have participated with, even on the way that it supports your smallholder farmers, one of them being Lima, some of the farmers in Mpumalanga are producing okra for the market in Durban and for the market in Johannesburg and Pretoria. Likewise, now the farmers in Durban will produce other produce for the farmers for the markets in Joburg, and maybe in Joburg we don't produce that much for the other provinces. But with technologies like hydroponic farming, which increases the efficiency of using the space, you will find that in some of the malls now, you find that on the rooftops they have aquaponics where they grow crops basically on water. That's the hydroponic. But yes, it is taking place. Now, the challenge that you have though with those is a buyer in Durban who's buying a produce coming from Limpopo. Now he has to pay for the logistics, for the fuel, for the driver of that, for the pack house, maybe 2 pack houses, one in Limpopo for the other. But yes, it does happen.
May I also just add on to what Lionel has said? So trade in barter depends on a principle that is known as coincidence of wants. I have to want what you have, and you have to want what I have. So much as the cross-province trading is happening, it's not necessarily bartering because of the nature of the markets that have been developed around farming in the country and also around the region, or maybe let's just say in our current economic model. So it might happen, but at a very, very low level, because the problem is, how do you assess the value between two parties? I've got potatoes, you've got apples. How many potatoes do I give you to be equivalent for you to be happy that I've got apples? So the administration and management of it is quite a complex system. That's why the markets have kind of simplified it to say, let's have a common value, which is the rand, which anybody can use to measure the value of their produce or the value of what they want to get. So bartering, yeah, it may happen, but not to the extent that we think, not to a large extent, simply because of the administrative processes, but also most importantly, that principle of coincidence of wants. And even then, that requires information for me to know what you have, if I'm going to know whether I want what you have. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Sonko. Lionel, can you move to the next with speed? We don't have much time. I'm going to request the audience to bear with us. We might be a bit out of time by 5 minutes or so. Let's move, Lionel.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks, Sonko, for that. I simply I simply made that assumption which you were explaining. That's why I just touched on the cross-province trading. But thanks for clarifying that. The good practice number 7. This is fit purpose financial support. Fit purpose, meaning that you do not just throw money there or use the standard ways of even on things like repayments. Remember, in farming, you do not plant today and by tomorrow you are selling or having the income. Maybe the crop that you're selling might take 3 from the day that the seed hits the ground to the day you harvest. It could be 3 months. Then you probably then harvest to finish the whole field of harvesting. Then you might probably need 2 weeks, 15 days of harvesting. And then from there, you need to load the trucks. You need to transport the produce to the market, which might probably take you a week. Then it stays it reaches the client or the customer. The customer takes it, and then they give you 30 days. They pay you after 30 days. So before you know it, you have 7 months, but you have a farmer has not received any payment. So when we when we look at the financial support, one has to look at all those activities that will take place from the day of ordering the seeds or the seedlings to the day that the cash hits the bank. So that financial support should be tailor-made for those activities. Now, this is probably the most common challenges or barriers when you speak to smallholder farmers. They will tell you that they've got great ideas, they've got the skills to do it, but the banks do not listen to them, mainly because they don't have collateral. They don't own the land. The land is owned by the chief. And also they don't even have maybe an account with PEP, if PEP does have accounts, or an account with Edgar's. Then they stand no chance of getting that funding. When you look at the financial support, then we look at 2 key components, which is the access to the required finance I have mentioned that it must be tailored to the needs of the beneficiaries, and even the repayments should also be tailor-made to that. You also, in many cases, we blend the funding to the smallholder farmer, where it will be partly loan and also which will be blended with grant. Why the loan part is so that the repayments can be used to support many more beneficiaries, so that intervention or that project can go into perpetuity. The financial planning and farming operations, this is where was it Ryan who had raised that comment that the packages that we give should also include that financial training. So we do not only look at the technical ability of the farmer, but the financial part of it, the marketing part of it, the whole business, the business management part of it. The key success factors here under access or under the financial support would be a detailed financial training plan, which would go deeper, but on things which are relevant to that specific farming activities. It should also be reasonable project and beneficiary budgets. When we budget, in most cases, when we participate in this project, we would look at whatever the budgets that are supplied by the beneficiary. We go into zero budgeting, where we say, okay, this line, what is included here? It goes into details, but also not that, but we also compare it with other similar farming activities or farmers out there, which is where the relationship that we have, good relationship we have with the associations out there in the agriculture, but it also works in other fields as well. That helps because they can give you the typical ranges of saying, if you are planting this, your inputs should be so much rand per hectare, etc. Then at the end of the day, we will then be able to provide a reasonable funding package. I think this is not, I know this is where I stop, Hilton, and over to you.
Thank you, Lionel. Can we move straight to Sonko, please?
Yes, thank you very much.
We don't have much time. Yeah.
Good afternoon, all. My name is Sonko Piri, and I'm a project manager within the Jobs Fund Project Management Unit. I'm just going to take you through the last of the remaining good practices, that is good practice 8 through to 10. But before I start with access to good practice 8, access to meaningful information, I think I just want to say that there are 10 good practices, but they're not mutually exclusive. And I think if you look at all of them, it's all about access to meaningful information. So provision of information, sourcing it, packaging it, and delivering it to either the farmer for them to be able to make a decision is what this whole package or the whole project is all about. So we need to have information that is effective, communicated effectively, and is also readily available, accessible, and available to the farmers. This info will enable farmers and the project team to make operation enhancing decisions. Some of the barriers to information for farmers that we've identified include lack of access to information in local languages, lack of computers and ICT skills to gather information. Many farmers do not have access to computers and lack the ICT capacity to gather information, but they do have cell phones though, even though it is rather expensive for them to use their cell phones, but then also there's also limited access on their cell phones. The issue with the cell phone is for you to be able to guide them to where they can get this information in a very timely manner and most effective way. The high cost of data in South Africa for most farmers, they cannot afford it. And I also just wanted to mention one thing here. we are looking at the full spectrum of farmers when you say most farmers, from the one at the subsistence level to the guy who is commercial or semi or wanting to go fully commercial. It's from the one who's planting maize to the one who's got plantations of macadamia or fruits and all of that. There's limited connectivity because of the location of the farms in the more rural and peri-urban areas. Connectivity is a problem, is slow and sometimes unavailable. Lack of training facilities to encourage group training and peer learning. The idea here is that once you bring a group of farmers together, they share information amongst themselves. So if one does not understand something, you can ask a colleague who has understood it, who can then relay the information in a way that is very easily understood to everybody. The key success factors here, we're looking at access to information in local languages is very important. A lot of these things, you find that the communication is either in English or Afrikaans, and most of our farmers, like Lionel said, are over the age of 68, and some of them may not be able to read and write in their own languages, let alone the foreign languages that we're using, like English and Afrikaans. We need to provide access to basic ICT training, and this is not things that we expect farmers to sit in front of a computer. Yes, there's a farmer who can sit in front of a computer, but then there's also a farmer who can have access to this information on their cell phone. We need to teach them, to enable them for them to be able to access that information on their phone or whatever interface device that they have. And we also need to provide group training facilities. The first thing in mind here, we're not looking, for example, at maybe building new halls and all of that. All we want, what we need here is to have a place where you can demonstrate what needs to happen. But sometimes also it can also happen actually on the person's farm. Next slide, please. Okay, this slide just looks to explain in further detail and breaks down what you need to have in place. I'm not going to dwell much about it. In terms of access in local languages, I think what you need to have is the actual training program itself in a local language. Access to basic ICT training. We're looking at, you should have manuals, at least maybe training registers. We need to have support for correspondence, for example, WhatsApp support group discussions, just to enable to continue so that the training is ongoing, it's not once off. Group training facilities. Like I mentioned, it can happen in an actual facility, but sometimes you can take the facilities or whatever equipment you have out to a farmer and do it right in the fields. And what you're looking for here is training registers and stuff and implements rather also that are going to be able to enable you to facilitate the session. Next slide, please. Okay, we are looking at good practice number 9, sustainable empowerment, which is what we want to have at the end of the day in working with all of these principles. The fund manager, that is the jobs funds, and the implementing partner must ensure that there's an integrative approach to the empowerment of the farmers during and post the project life cycle. Empowerment elements must be elicited at the project appraisal stage, enforced and enhanced during project implementation, and monitored post-project implementation. Some of the success factors for sustainable farmer empowerment is sustainable tenure security, which means they have land that they know for a finite time they can have access to. Full farmer decision-making empowerment. This is at 2 levels. It can come at the project level, but most importantly, a farmer should be able to make decisions on their own farms. Collective organization of farmers, bringing together farmers so that they can so that they can gain economies of scale, for example. That's one of the areas that we can also look at that, but then bringing them together as clubs as well, just for information sharing. Equity sharing and partnerships, giving these farmers access to ownership of established or value of a stake in the value chain that is above where they are in terms of the farming, etc., or even in their own farms. And so you also need to have those effective partnerships to enable them to gain the power and knowledge to be able to have the equity that is required. We're looking at also social facilitation. Full farmer understanding of the project value chain. I think that Lionel explained that earlier on. We call it from farm to fork. I mean, from right from the farm where it's planted to the plate where it's eaten with a fork and knife. Sustainable farmer exits from incubators. This is very critical because sometimes farmers are trained through incubators, and the problem is that an incubator sometimes comes to an end abruptly. We need to ease the farmers out of the incubator so that when they get out of the incubator, they can be able to stand on their own without a lot of assistance that was being provided in the incubator itself. Implementing agents exits that ensure farmer continued existence and sustainability, and then there should be continued mentorship. Next slide, please. Good practice 10, effective measurement arrangements. And I just wanted to mention one thing. A lot of the measurement arrangements, as we talk about them, we're talking about maybe from a project perspective. But I think even the farmer themselves, they need to have these matrices where they can be able to measure their achievements towards certain goals, right? So that this does not become a policing tool on the project, or it's not only a project management tool, it's actually a good farming tool as well. So each of these good practices that we've talked about elements are underpinned by an effective monitoring and evaluation, both on the farm and as the project. In any farmer support program, it is fundamental to have strict monitoring and control measures in place that, one, ensure reliable collection of information regarding the progress of farmers, two, serve as early warning systems for potential problems to prevent issues before they occur and or mitigate problems should they occur, and three, allow valid measurement of impact, both at the farmer and intervention level. Lionel mentioned around your output. So for example, your output drops from 3 tons a hectare to 1 ton a hectare. You should be able to know what you were supposed to get and what you have gotten and be able to measure yourself against a certain metric. But us as project managers, we also need to have these systems in place to be able to collect this information. And the thing with on-farm information, especially with maybe some of the smaller farmers, is that they may not have the capacity to do this type of information collection, but that is what the project is all about, to empower them to be able to carry out this type of tasks. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sonko. Thank you, colleagues and all that attended this particular session. We apologize with a bit of an overrun of that, but we hope you learned a lot from us and we'll learn a lot from you. And if there are any other comments that you might want, please send them through for us to learn post this. What I want to say is that there is a brief session evaluation to be completed, and we encourage you to provide your feedback on that session. The recording and the slides of this particular session are available on the GTAC website. Thank you again for being with us and for giving your ear to us. Have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you, colleagues. Have a great weekend. Bye.
Cheers, everyone.
Cheers all.